So in chapter 7, we're looking at more fallacies, more errors in argumentation that we need to avoid. And when we go over these, you might think of arguments that you've heard that might qualify as one of these fallacies. You're going to see it a lot out there. And often, you might have engaged in these fallacies before, not aware that they represent an error in argumentation. So we definitely benefit from learning more about these fallacies, forms of argumentation that we need to avoid. First, perhaps the most popular fallacy is ad hominem. Anybody know what the ad hominem fallacy is? Yes, sir.
Is that where you attack the person instead of the issue?
Exactly. When considerations about a person are used to refute an argument made by the person, Latin for to the man, your argument goes to the man rather than the argument that the man has offered. And strictly speaking, the idea is that we need to be able to evaluate an argument on its merits. And we need to determine whether it is valid, whether it's sound, or whether it's a strong inductive argument. And all these things have nothing to do with the person who's actually offered the argument. And so if you're directing your attack to the person, you're overlooking what you should be analyzing, and that is the argument. Even if this argument is offered from an axe murderer or an idiot or somebody with a very low IQ, they can offer an argument that is valid and sound. And we should be able to evaluate it on its merits without making a big deal about who offers the argument. There's a couple of types of ad hominem fallacy. The personal attack is when you attack the person making a claim and use that as an argument against the argument offered by the person. You see that a lot. President Obama's an idiot, therefore his jobs plan really can't work. That has nothing to do with analyzing the jobs plan. It has everything to do with blaming this person and then using that critique of the person to falsely criticize the argument. Personal attack ad hominem. Now, this brings up an interesting... Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, that was my question. Doesn't
Really?
this contradict what we said before?
Yes.
About evaluating the source and all that?
Oh, well, great eye. We need to discuss about that tension. And it's actually consistent, but it does lead to kind of an issue that we need to consider here. Does anybody remember what she's talking about? Good that we go over that. What we're saying here is that we ought to focus on the argument and not the person offering the argument. And we need to evaluate that argument independent of the person. Well, if you remember in our discussion of credibility, that wasn't what we were suggesting, was it? We were noting that what's the difference between an interested and a non-interested party with respect to credibility?
Disinterested party is more credible.
Exactly. Now, that seems like we're going to evaluate information from a person based in part on our analysis of that person. So that could be seen as being inconsistent with the ad hominem fallacy. Now, here's what they're going to say. When we're dealing with an interested party, we need to be skeptical of the information they provide. And we need to double check the sources, things like that. But we should never use aspects about the person to reject the argument out of hand. So aspects of the person can lead us to be more skeptical, but they can't by themselves be used to refute an argument. So it would be an ad hominem fallacy for us to say that this argument made by the representative from BP about the BP oil spill is totally baloney. We can't do that. What we can do is be very skeptical of the argument provided. double check the sources and everything like that. And that would be justified based on the issues with respect to credibility. But when it comes to our final decision on the argument itself, we can't use aspects about the person to refute the argument completely. It can be used to make us more skeptical, but it can't be used by itself to refute the argument. If we do, then we're committing this ad hominem fallacy. Very good. You get the Buddha for the day. And in fact, I kind of clued everybody into this potential conflict when I was talking about it initially, because I was sensitive to that very issue. These two kind of run up against each other. Any questions with ad hominem? There's actually other versions we're going to talk about. So aspects about the person should not be used to refute the argument, but they can be used to make us more skeptical. How about the inconsistency ad hominem fallacy? This is when we use the fact that a person is saying something that is inconsistent with what they've said before to refute that argument that they're saying now, because it's inconsistent with what they've done before. Moore's claim is inconsistent with something else Moore has said, therefore his claim stands refuted. For example, Rush Limbaugh. President George W. Bush says now that he believes in global warming. But when he was campaigning, he scoffed at the idea. Now, Rush Limbaugh is going to use the fact that he scoffed at the idea during the campaign to reject the fact that he now believes in global warming. Here's the problem. We all have been idiots. We've all done things that are wrong. And if everybody uses what we've done in the past to undermine an argument that we offer now, you could say that none of us is going to be consistent all the time. And the fact that we might have been wrong in the past is actually irrelevant to the value of the argument we're providing now. So the fact that a position we're taking now is inconsistent with a position we've taken in the past cannot be used to argue that our position that we're taking now is wrong. You see that? Yes, ma'am.
Didn't you say before at the beginning of this class earlier this semester that a good way of analyzing an argument was looking at, somebody publishes a series of books and you pull excerpts out of one book and, you say, well, this, contradicts what you're saying in this newest book.
Correct. Now, I think we would handle that exactly like we just handled the other one. And that is that in order to judge the credibility of information, we're going to have to learn about the person's profession, whether they have expertise in the field, blah, 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 like that. And if they don't, we can use that as a reason to be more skeptical and to check the sources, things like that. But once again, if we use aspects about the person by themselves to refute the argument, then we're committing this inconsistency ad hominem. So if we go into somebody's past and we find that they have been inconsistent and they've been writing articles all over the place, we could use that to judge or to undermine the credibility of what they're saying now, if they've all over the place. But we can question the credibility of what they're saying now, but we can't refute it completely simply on that basis. We still have to evaluate the argument on its merits. So once again, a good point, how the issues of credibility are going to kind of run upside these fallacies a bit. If somebody's inconsistent all the time, once again, that would be a reason to be skeptical about what they're saying. But that can't be used by itself to reject what they're saying or to refute the argument. People change their minds, and fortunately, former President Bush did. Many people would argue that it's wrong not to believe in global warming and that when he changed his mind, he became correct. And if you use that inconsistency to argue against what he's doing now, we're rejecting a valid argument. So inconsistency ad hominem is something that we need to be wary of. U2, as it's often referred to, not the band, but when a claim is rejected because it is inconsistent with the behavior of the person making the claim. Any other examples of this? I think some made a big deal about Al Gore doing on with his presentation and everything about global warming, and then his home like burns energy like it was going out of style, and his behavior in his life, many argue, was inconsistent with the ideals he was advocating. So I think he went and he started buying renewable energy certificates to offset the burning of fossil fuels in his home so he can feel better. When a smoker rejects the claim that he should quit smoking because it is made by another smoker, you know, if your dad, you shouldn't smoke, son, that's bad for you. Well, here's the thing. The fact that he's being inconsistent with what his argument doesn't make his argument wrong. You know? And there can be cases, believe me, son, it sucks, I can't breathe, I'm going to die soon. He might be right, you know? And so just the fact that he's inconsistent shouldn't undermine the argument by itself. Yeah.
But isn't that hypocritical? It doesn't, him being a hypocrite mean it's you have less obligation to act even if it is right?
Here's the thing, and what we're illustrating here is that hypocrites can sometimes be right.
But there's also something wrong with that. The do as I say, not as I do model of so they have no right. They may be right, they have no right to tell you that.
Well, one would argue they're not telling you anything to do. They're just advocating, I think you should do this. So they're not saying, by law, you have to. They're imparting information. We ought to thank them. Adam?
In that case, when the person knows the consequences already for the team,
I've been smoking for 30 years, man. I know.
Yes, he loves you so much and doesn't want you to get in that situation.
Yeah.
People.
It's interesting. You could hold that person accountable for being hypocritical, but the idea here is the argument needs to be judged on its merits, independent of that hypocrisy. And it's pretty clear in the case of smokers. You could have some habits where you become out of control, get addicted. And a lot of these people don't have control of quitting at this point. So it is a difficult thing. I haven't smoked, and so I hadn't had to quit, thank goodness. Another version of the ad hominem fallacy is the circumstantial ad hominem. This is rejecting a claim because of the circumstances of the person making the claim. For example, you can forget what Father Hennessy says about abortion because he is a priest. And obviously we can't, accept an argument about abortion from a priest. So you're using the fact that this person has a particular profession to argue against that argument. Once again, this is going to be inappropriate. We should be able to judge the merits of an argument, even one given by a priest, independent of aspects of that person's profession. So this would be what we call a circumstantial ad hominem. It's circumstantial because these aspects about the person's background are accidental or just circumstantial. In different circumstances, they would be different. And so we should not reject an argument just because of the profession of the person making the argument. And for example, some have pointed out that Al Gore has invested in carbon trading, a carbon trading service in Chicago. And the idea is if we begin to put a limit on the amount of carbon that businesses can emit, they'll begin to sell these credits, and people can make money off of this trading of carbon credits. Well, some have argued that Al Gore, therefore, is making money off of the sustainability movement. And therefore, just like Father Hennessy, you can't really trust Al Gore because he's in the business of green. And this could be part of his sales pitch. And once again, you could use this aspect of that person, the fact that he's investing in this area, to undermine the arguments made by that person. Strictly speaking, this would be a part of the circumstantial ad hominem. Questions, comments? People can be inconsistent, and they can still offer a valid argument. That's essentially the point. But once again, the points that both of you, Greer, made are relevant here. If somebody is blatantly contradicting something in their own life, or if they are clearly serving their own self-interest in some way, that does give us reason to be skeptical of the information provided. And it does give us reason to double check the sources. But it doesn't give us reason by itself to reject the argument completely. Yes, sir?
If everyone was consistent, we'd still be on a flat planet.
Right, exactly. Wouldn't make progress at all. Very good point. Caleb?
What about when, I guess John McCain was a senator, he was opposed to the Iraq War, and then suddenly he's campaigning because he's for it?
Well, here, you could...
He's an interested party, I think, so.
Oh, that's a heavy issue there. But one could argue that when we're judging the qualities of a politician, that's something different. Because when we think about an election, here we're talking about evaluating an argument offered by John McCain. And if that's the case, then you could argue that we need to keep these aspects of his own career aside from our analysis of the argument. However, if you're thinking about voting for John McCain, well, the different positions he's taken on these issues has to be taken into account. And there's no fallacy there. We're simply trying to judge the qualities of the politician. So the fact that he's changed his position on these issues so often does give you a reason not to vote for him, but it wouldn't give you a reason to reject out of hand an argument that he makes. Yes, sir, Carson.
So there was this thing that we did in high school where it was like they had a bunch of quotes by certain politicians like Obama, McCain, Bush, but they rearranged who said it. So like a quote Obama said might have said like was like from George Bush, and then asked like who you agree with, and
Yeah.
like the amount of people who agreed with something just because whoever said it. Is that kind of like this? Like
Yes, absolutely. That would be trying to judge the value of what was said based on the qualities of the person in some sense. Did a lot of people misattribute quotes?
yeah, like well they would like read a quote and then who said it and they'd be like, oh well, I guess I kind of agree with that. But then like when they like showed who actually said it, they're like, oh no, never mind.
That's a perfect example. If you're rejecting a position just because of who advocates it, yeah, then you're committing an ad hominem fallacy in some sense. Very good. Another version of the ad hominem fallacy is what we call poisoning the well. And this could be considered a kind of ad hominem in advance. This is when someone leads you to reject a claim by poisoning your view of the person making the claim. I think Rush Limbaugh dwells in this territory quite often. Van Jones, isn't he a Marxist? Does anybody know who Van Jones is?
Yeah, the Obama's woman or something.
The green jobs guy. President Obama had this guy, Van Jones, who was, I forget what position he had in the White House or in the administration, but he was focused on creating green jobs for people, particularly in lower economic classes. And the general focus of Van's work was to provide green jobs because he feels that they would be more sustainable going forward than jobs based on fossil fuels or other kinds of things. Glenn Beck went at Van Jones like it was nobody's business, talking about how he advocated communist positions as a young man. very revolutionary in his politics, and generally, this guy's background was used to tear apart what he's doing now. And eventually, Van Jones had to leave the administration. And it was a real notch in Glenn Beck's belt. Interesting how Glenn Beck isn't with us anymore. But many argue that Beck's attack on Van Jones were really a version of poisoning the well. What Van Jones was doing for the administration had nothing to do with communism, Marxism, or anything like that. It was about helping people get good jobs that might be around for a while. But if you can talk about this guy's background and undermine his success, make Obama look bad, you can really put pressure, on the administration to get rid of him. And Beck's work really would represent a form of poisoning of the well. Now, it would be super easy to find a version on the other side of the political fence too. This is done all the time. Rather than criticizing the position, you criticize the person and thereby undermine that position taken by the person. Poisoning the well. Anybody got some better examples? Poisoning the well. Poisoning the well. Oh, don't listen to him, he's a liberal. Or a conservative. Or whatever. Satan worshiper. Therefore, what he's talking about, you need to reject him. That'll be an example of poisoning the well.
Maybe the birther movement,
Good point.
or Obama's
Very good
Muslim-
point. Good example. That could be a way to undermine his candidacy, suggest that he's not an American citizen.
Well, you'd think that there would be a stronger argument from something based in fact.
In fact, some people made a point of saying his name is Barack Hussein Obama. And by stating his middle name, some hope to poison the well.
Yeah, Bill O'Reilly did that when he was like president-elect or whatever. Then the first anytime he said his name, he said his full name. Yeah.
It is pretty weird that our president has a middle name that was same as this terrorist that was.
I saw this one thing on some local Fox channel when Osama died, he was killed.
Some
It said
people-
Obama bin Laden died. Killed or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
So
Obama bin Laden killed.
what was that?
Yeah, it said that on like the headline on the news.
Which news?
It was a
What's that
local
supposed to mean
Fox.
though?
No, I think it was it was an accident, but still, I don't know.
It wasn't that?
Unconscious projection.
You assume,
Yeah.
you assume it's an accident.
A form of wishful thinking on behalf of some of those. In any case, be wary of this, poisoning the well. I love this line here. Miss Jones is not an axe murderer, but associating her name with that term, axe murderer, will forever be imprinted on people's minds. And this could be a way for a prosecuting attorney to make a defendant look bad. She's not an axe murderer. She's not a heroin addict. But just associating her name with all those things can, in a way, be a form, slightly tricky form of poisoning the well. Now, a kind of basic fallacy that has often been seen as the origin of these other fallacies we've been discussing is what we call the genetic fallacy. This is when we reject a claim because of its origin or history. We reject a claim because of its origin or history. And once again, the idea here is that we should be able to evaluate a claim on its merits, independent of its origin or its history, independent of who has offered the argument and how they've changed their mind over time. We ought to be able to analyze the argument simply on its merits. Now, this genetic fallacy is often considered to be a blanket fallacy that includes ad hominem, because in an ad hominem fallacy, we are rejecting an argument because of the person who originated or is offering that argument now. So we could see the ad hominem fallacy as a version of the genetic fallacy. What happens now is that the genetic fallacy is used to refer to cases where the person is not the target. When the person is the target, we call it ad hominem. But the target can be a club, a political party, or an industrial group. For example, we can't listen to that guy because he's from BP. And everything BP says about the oil spill is going to be wrong. Well, that would be a version of the genetic fallacy that doesn't refer to a person, it refers to a company or an industrial group. Question, comment back there?
Prescott Bush, George Bush's grandfather, George Sr.'s father, he was a chairman for a certain bank that was funding the Nazi Party and selling them certain commodities or whatever. And he was found guilty for treason and everything, and he was pardoned. Like him and his whole bank were under, and then he was a Nazi supporter and everything. He was he started he funded the Nazi Party in America. He was tried for all of that and then pardoned by whoever the president was at the time.
How did we hear nothing about that?
It's on his Wikipedia thing. Like he's tried in the U.S. court. Like they had court hearings about it and everything.
I know about Prescott.
Yeah.
Wow.
I forgot the name of the bank, but yeah, they were funneling gold and everything, like millions and millions of dollars to the Nazi Party.
Well, and more than that, he helped the Nazis move their money to Caribbean bank accounts.
IG Farben.
Laundered.
Farben? What's that company? IG Farben or? There was a company where he funneled, they would funnel it into that company, and that company would give it to the Nazi Party.
Wow.
So they were trying to be sneaky about it, but they got caught.
Well, he was also a senator later in life. So he was the first politician.
Yeah.
Dynasty.
And the guy who worked for that was the head of the bank that was funding the Nazi Party was Jewish.
It's amazing how two Bushes could be president and you don't hear that issue more prominently discussed. Interesting. Well, just because their grandfather did things doesn't mean that what they're advocating would be wrong.
Whenever they're killing boatloads of people too, generation after generation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of blood on their hands.
Galen.
Wouldn't if you use BP for an example, wouldn't they be an interested party? Wouldn't they be less credible because they're interested in having a favorable view of them after the oil spill?
We've covered that. How should we handle it?
We should just be more skeptical.
Correct.
Can you be ad hominem to salesmen?
Well, let's finish this point
Alright,
first.
sorry, yeah.
We need to make sure that we all understand how we handle these cases where we have this tension. The idea is that we can't reject something out of hand because of aspects of the person who's bringing forward the argument or aspects of the company bringing forward the argument. If we reject the argument simply for that reason, then we're committing this genetic fallacy. However, with respect to the chapter on credibility, we know that if it's an interested party, we have to be more skeptical. So we're going to double check the sources, and we're going to test the math or make sure that the argument is valid. But that's not going to be a reason. Aspects of the person or the company offering the argument shouldn't be used to refute the argument by itself. It gives us reason to be skeptical, but not a reason to reject the argument completely. Yeah.
Also, Bush's ancestor, not ancestor, but great something, and Kerry, John Kerry's, and a few other people. They were a part of the East Indian Trading Company.
Yes.
And they were smuggling opium to all over the world. And that's Bush's ancestors, Kerry, a bunch of our politicians, and were part. You were the East Indian Trading Company. Those people, they got their kids and their lower generations to get positions of high ranks. And they would start wars. They would fund wars. The East Indian Trading Company just to make profit.
Just
opium smugglers.
Does illustrate how I forget who it was that wrote the article. I think it was Zygmunt Brzezinski. He points out that this Occupy crowd talks about that 1 in 99% thing. Most of our legislators are part of that 1%.
And they're calling it class warfare and divisiveness.
Yeah.
But that's pretty.
Did you ever heard
That
of
was
King
choice on, in fact, it was a Republican governor was on The Daily Show. And I think we might have talked about this before. He was making the case, this Republican governor, Mitch Daniels, that we need to move away from that divisive terminology, class warfare and everything. But then when he went on to speak about President Obama, he said that Obama is punishing rich people with these blah, blah, blah. And Jon Stewart said, hold up a second. What do you mean by punishing? That sounds like a class warfare word. And let's simplify here. By punishing, you mean expecting rich people to pay the same rate on their taxes as poor people. You call that punishing. And if that's the fact, then we're already punishing poor people. You know? So you need to be wary of that terminology. Let me go on a little bit here. So the genetic fallacy is the idea that you can't reject a proposal just because of its origin. And if we're rejecting a proposal because it comes from a person, that would be ad hominem fallacy. But if we're rejecting an argument because it comes from a particular party or company or club, then it's part of what we call the genetic fallacy. And for example, if we reject a proposal because it came from the Democratic Party or the NRA, if we use that fact by itself to reject the argument, then we're committing the genetic fallacy. But if it does come from one of these organizations, and one of these organizations has done or advocated a lot of wrong policies in the past, that would give us reason to be more skeptical. But not enough reason to reject it out of hand. A lot of examples that we can use here. Any questions with the genetic fallacy? Once again, we're rejecting a claim because of its origin or history. Now, the ad hominem goes both ways. You can't use aspects of a person's life to reject an argument made by that person without committing the ad hominem fallacy. But it's also true that you can't use aspects of a person's life to justify an argument made by that person. And that would be what we call the positive ad hominem fallacy. This is when a claim is accepted because of the characteristics of the person making the claim. Warren Buffett has made more money in his life than we could spend in ours. As a result, people flock to, where is it, Omaha, Nebraska, I think, where they have the Berkshire Hathaway big conference where he talks about how he's going to invest in the future. And a lot of people think that anything that happens to fall out of Warren Buffett's mouth is a pearl of wisdom that is worth its weight in gold. And they will accept arguments that come from Warren Buffett because they came from Warren Buffett. Well, that would be an example of the positive ad hominem fallacy. We need to evaluate the arguments from Warren Buffett and every other person on their merits. And aspects about the person can not be used to refute the argument. It can give us good reason to think it might be acceptable, but it can't give us reason to accept that argument by itself. That would be the positive ad hominem fallacy. Any questions with this fallacy? Yeah.
Isn't that like siding up with your political party, like all the time? Like if you're a Republican, anything a Republican says is right. Even if you like inside you don't believe it, you have to believe, like you go along with it because you're a Republican, right, or you're a Democrat. But that
not quite, because political parties are really based on political philosophies. And actually in my intro class, we discussed the social philosophy of John Rawls that really provides a foundation for contemporary liberalism or progressivism. And we discussed the philosophy of Robert Nozick, who provides a foundation for contemporary conservatism. And people who are members of a party tend to be advocates of these social philosophies that guide that party. And if you are an advocate of the social philosophy that guides the party, then you would have an interest in voting the ticket, regardless of the particular person on it. So that could be a way to explain that kind of behavior without it being a positive ad hominem. However, you're on the right track. You know, if you simply accept a candidate simply because they come from that party, and you accept every argument that comes from that person because they come from that party, left or right, you could be getting close to this positive ad hominem fallacy.
You know, like when Obama was running for president, it was like everyone like was just like, yeah, like he's a man. Like,
Absolutely.
He's gonna change this world.
I remember those skits on Saturday Night Live where they have a debate between Obama and Hillary Clinton, and the first question from the interviewer in the debate is, Senator Obama, I want to ask, are you comfortable? Can I get you something to drink? They were all, boy, those were the days, weren't they? It's changed. Many argue that now he could save a school bus of children going over a bridge and they still blame him for it. But he probably thinks back to those
But,
days.
yeah, back in those days, it was like
It's still pretty
school
similar.
bus for children every day.
Days.
That's what he does.
Milk and honey.
You see that woman when they became president? She was like, "Shut! I don't gotta pay my mortgage anymore."
I can just see Obama. Oh my God! What am I gonna
I
do?
gotta cover this lady's mortgage.
Oh my!
I bet someone covered her mortgage just because she's like been.
Actually,
Someone
I
must have
get
picked
somebody
it up.
on that. I don't have to pay my mortgage. Why am I running for president of this country? Can you tell me why? It makes no sense to me. So, positive ad hominem fallacy. And you know what? We're about out of time, so let's pick it up there next time. You guys have a great